you say, everybody's always known. I think various characters, both external and internal, are trying to turn up the heat on one another. But I don't know that actually amounts to anything until there's, again, a real crack in the regime and it collapses. I don't know how close we are to that, really.
What happens when that crack takes place?
I don't know. Same thing with when the crack takes place on the front. I don't know. And that all gets back to Moscow. It really depends on what they want to do and how much they want to, frankly, fool themselves into thinking somebody is going to actually make a real deal with them. And I, like I said earlier, I don't know the answer to that question.
They do seem to want a deal. I always make this argument that Moscow is chasing safety. That from their point of view, they don't want to take West Ukraine. All things being equal, they want this to be over with. But I would imagine there are factions in Russia, as you point out, that we're not in the business of another Minsk, one or two. We're not in the business of another Istanbul. Meaning, is there a pressure that's being applied to Putin? I mean, there's been a lot of criticism also in Russia on Putin's, let's say, slow, methodical, continued negotiation stance.
Yeah.
Will that pressure affect how he ultimately handles any kind of resolution to this conflict?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, again, it needs to be said one more time. Putin is not a dictator. He's not Stalin. He cannot just say, I want to do this, I want to do that. He's got a balance between factions there. And we don't know how powerful some of these factions are. You know, some people say he's really a puppet of the Chabad organization. You know, he's a Jewish puppet, just like Trump is. You know, I mean, look, I don't know what to make of all that. I think a lot of people miss the discussion, though, about the regions of Ukraine. They think of the east, the south and the east, everything from Odessa to Kharkov, and say, okay, that's essentially Russian. And then you've got the west. And when I talk about the west, I mean the far, far west. I mean like Uzhgorod and Lvov, these areas that were part of the Austrian Empire before 1914 and part of Poland before 1939. That's the far, far west. And the Russians have made it clear they don't want that. But everything east of that, including all of Ukraine from Kiev all the way over to the far west, Zhytomyr, places like this that are Ukrainian-speaking areas that were in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, they're not as virulently anti-Russian as the places in the far west are. And I think those are eminently, if you will, annexable by Russia, or at least the basis of a Ukrainian state that would not be a problem for the Russians. So when we say the West, yeah, I think that quote West is in a very different category from the far, far west. And I'm sure the Russians understand this. But on the other hand, we don't even, people say, well, once Pokrovsk falls, it's off to the Dnieper River. Well, really? I mean, they've shown, they're still creeping into Kharkov. They're still creeping, as you said, in Zaporozhye. There's talk that they're moving into the direction of Odessa. But my sense is they would rather not do that. I think that's a mistake. I think they should do that. I think if this war ends with anything less than everything from Odessa to Kharkov, it is objectively a defeat for Russia and an invitation to the next war, which will be even more devastating and maybe a total uncontrolled war that we could all, kiss various body parts goodbye.
Is this document, the National Security Strategy by Trump, assuming it's even actionable, is it a break in the U.S.-European association or connection, or do you see it that way? I mean, he obviously, his contempt for Europe is breathtaking in this document.
I don't see it that way at all. I don't see it. I see a lot of people saying, well, it's this document shows the Americans are walking away from Europe. I don't see that at all. Remember, to walk away from Europe means that we have to renounce Europe as a sphere of American influence. And there's nothing in the document. A lot of people say, well, this is a multipolar
world. That's what they say. This is multipolar.
And all that, because we're doubling down in the Western Hemisphere and enhanced the Monroe Doctrine. We got to go kill Venezuelans or whoever. No, certainly we are reconsolidating in a very stupid way, in my opinion, our dominance in the Western Hemisphere. But you notice there's not a syllable in there indicating that we're going to grant recognize spheres of influence of other powers, the Russians, the Chinese, and so forth. Like with China, they talk about, well, first island chain, South China Sea, and all that. Like we still have to be the regional hegemon there, even though it's right on China's shore. In terms of Europe, people say, well, the European section says we're going to reach an accommodation with the Russians. It doesn't say that. It just says we want a stable relationship between Europe and Russia. What does that mean exactly? What I think we're seeing here is kind of like what happened, and I've always compared Trump to kind of an American Gorbachev, who will produce similar results, by the way, in my opinion. That just as the Soviets got rid of all the little Brezhnevs in Eastern Europe and installed little Gorbachev reform communists, I think what Trump would like to do, or whoever wrote that document, is get rid of all the little Joe Bidens in Europe and install little Trumps, instead of having all these globalist, like I described earlier, anti-national, anti-historical, self-hating globalist leaders who are U.S. puppets. We want to have pro-American, little Viktor Orbáns all over the continent. A French Orbán, maybe Marine Le Pen, or maybe somebody like Nigel Farage in London, and so on and so forth. Which, in my opinion, would be an improvement. But it hardly means America walking away from the continent. It means we'd have more reliable leaders that we could count on to actually mobilize their populations against Russia and be a real force against Russia compared to these idiots that they have there now. So I think that's the real thrust of the document if you read the document carefully. If you separate the rhetoric in the first part from the regional outline of policy that you find in the latter part of the document, which is one reason why the document is so incoherent.
One last question. Venezuela.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on with this? Like it seems outrageous. He's just murdering people in the Caribbean. They just stole the oil tanker.
Yeah.
And I think it's like 20-30% of U.S. military hardware in regards to the Navy is sitting in the Caribbean right now, and yet he hasn't pulled the trigger on using that hardware. It seems like there's some quibble within the administration on doing this. I mean, I think I've made the argument, and other people made the argument, Trump has fallen into a trap of his own making on this because there's no win in this. But give me your take. What do you think is going on?
Well, there could be a win. I mean, there were reports that Maduro had offered Trump essentially, the sun, moon, and the stars. That you want to come in, have your companies come in, help us exploit Venezuelan energy resources and all that. We're open to that, and I think he could have taken a win. And I think would have been a rather substantial win. I don't think it was a necessary win for the United States, but if it means we're going to get dealt in to whatever the resource issues are in Venezuela, I think that would have been something where he can say, hey, I just solved my 18th war or whatever it is. I don't think he's willing to take that offer. And again, I don't know who is, everybody's saying, and I assume it's true, that Marco Rubio is the guy who's taking the lead on this, and he is bound and determined. There's no deal. Even if they bare their throat and offer us everything, that's not good enough. He's got to go, and we have to have regime change, and we need to dictate who rules in Caracas. And I think, unfortunately, you're like you said, he's painted himself into that corner. With anything less than that now is a defeat for him. So we've gone, from murder on the high seas to piracy on the high seas. And I don't know what their next move is going to be. And somebody has compared our buildup in the region to pulling back on a bowstring. You can only stand there for so long doing that before you either release it or you shoot the arrow. And I think the indications are growing that we're going to shoot the arrow. And it looks also like the Russians and the Chinese are doubling down on their pledges of support to Maduro. And, and maybe there's a temptation for them to say, oh, well, you wanted to bleed, the Russians say, you wanted to bleed us white in Ukraine. Well, maybe we'll bleed you white in Venezuela when you go in.
We'll do the same. Yeah.
Maybe Venezuela turns into our Ukraine, and maybe it works out better for the Russians there than it did work out for us in Ukraine.
Do you think he'd be crazy enough to put in U.S. troops?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Well, I mean, one scenario I've heard, what makes a lot of sense, actually, if anything makes sense here, is that they do sort of what the Soviets did in Afghanistan. You have a coup in the capital and a new government installed, and then they invite you in to fight the rebels. So it's possible we have assets in Caracas. They stage a coup, overthrow the government, claim to be the new government of Venezuela, invite American allies in to suppress the remnants of the old regime that are still loyal to Maduro's regime.